You're good to go.
All right, let's find a seat. We're going to get this show on the road. I want to say hello and welcome to the monthly meeting of the day chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. My name is Steve. I'm your new president. And for those of you who are new and enjoy tonight's meeting, please consider joining our not-for-profit organization, which promotes the conservation and use of native plants. You may sign up on, there's a clipboard in the back, I think next to where our books are. And you can sign up for a free mailing of our newsletter or emailing these days, the Talansia. And that's what's on the screen. All right. So I do want to thank some people here. It's been a while since I've done these duties. Now I need glasses. I wish to thank all the plant raffle donors. We do have a plant raffle at every meeting. And I do want to announce that if you want to also bring plants to raffle, you can exchange it for a raffle ticket for each plant brought in. That is an old rule that we have. All money brought in from raffle ticket sales goes toward the organizations as donations. Many of these are donated by our board member, Raul. And if you want to buy more, check out our new online store. And if you wish to buy raffle tickets, you can buy from this gentleman over here. Make sure he doesn't put the money in his pocket, though. I do have some announcements. On July 21st is our next meeting, which will be an evening yard visit and social from 5 to 7:30 p.m. So July 21st is a Sunday. And Raul Moas, who's also the person who helped us grow plants for our online store, has offered for us to visit his home in Pinecrest, which is a fascinating mix of pine rockland restoration, hammock, native grass demonstration. There are some non-natives and fruit trees, and there's water features such as ponds and more. Potluck refreshments might make a light dinner. There will be a raffle as usual and plants available for purchase as well. This event is for FNPS members and their guests, not the general public. Like, this meeting is for anyone, but the yard visit is a social. We do have a field trip the day before on July 20th, and it will be at the Richmond Communication Station owned and managed by the U.S. Coast Guard, not normally accessible by the public without special permission. And I'll be leading this along with member Megan Klauser, who works for the Coast Guard. It's a special site, which is part of the Richmond Tract, which we'll learn a little bit about today. The zoo is also part of the Richmond Pine Rockland Tract. And as I mentioned, it's not normally available to the public. They had a fire earlier this year. I went to see it in February, and it looks pretty neat. So there should be some great wildflowers by now. Field trips are normally for members, and details will be in the July Talansia. We really do get to some of the coolest places on our field trips. And if you haven't read the article by member Joe Montes de Oca on June's Talansia, I recommend you check it out. It's where we went to Deer Hammock in Everglades National Park. We are looking for a new chair for the field trip committee. I'm the chair, but as president, I think someone else can step in. If you're interested and have connections, please come see me if you're interested. But hopefully it's someone that kind of knows people that kind of manage lands and stuff like that. We have a special, we're going to a special event this Saturday called Community Day at the USDA testing facility at Chapman Field. And they're testing plants, not people. Okay. And that's That's right up the road on Old Cutler Road here. It's kind of a neat old site. We will have a display table and plant sale, and we still need some volunteers. Gwen, stand up. Gwen Berzicki has brought a clipboard. If you could help in the morning or afternoon, please give us your name and your contact number, and Gwen will call you and help set up the greatest time for you to come. Our setup is sometime between 7 and 9 a.m. No expertise is needed. You can learn on the job. There will always be another person there. And so that's that announcement. Did I miss anything, Gwen? Okay. For those of you who are looking for a job, FNPS has an opening for the executive director position. You can check it out online at fnps.org if you're interested. There will be a work day at Everglades National Park Visitor Center, likely on July 27th or August 3rd. If you're interested in helping, contact Patty Ferris. She's in the newsletter. She's our newsletter editor. Just another announcement. Native Plant Day next year in March will this time be at Castello Hammock Park instead of Bill Sadowski. That's down in the Redlands. Does anyone have any other announcements? Gwen?
We can't be active in community without volunteers. So I have another clipboard. If you are interested at all in volunteering for whatever, but basically you're willing for us to give you a call and say, can you please put your contact information on this clipboard?
All right, thank you, Gwen. Anyone else have any announcements? All right, I guess I'll do the raffle descriptions. We have a huge selection tonight. We need you to buy all the tickets. So since Raoul's really been bringing plants, we really have a plethora of wildflowers, which is great. Wildflowers attract a lot of pollinators. And one wildflower we have here is tropical sage. This will either have white, pink, or red flowers. Salvia coccinea. The wild ones usually have red flowers. This one doesn't really occur in Dade naturally. It occurs further north of here, but it's very attractive for hummingbirds, which will visit the flowers, but will also attract buntings, which eat the seeds. We have our state wildflower, this Tixie, Coreopsis leavenworthii. This is an annual. It'll have yellow flowers, real bright and pretty, with a brown center. And this is indeed native to Dade County. You can see them like in Everglades National Park. It's fairly uncommon in Dade. They usually grow in moist soils and pinelands or on the edge of. We also have a great plant for your yard. This is blue porterweed or Stachytarpida jemicense. This is a great nectar plant. It's also a host plant for, I think, one of the buckeyes, which is a butterfly, and maybe something else. Tropical. And one of the skippers, okay. If you have some room, we have a tree here. This is a sea grape, Coccoloba uvifera. These used to be a lot more popular in the landscape when I was a kid down here. You don't really see people plant them in their yards like they used to. The neat thing about this plant is the leaves get pretty big, almost as big as a paper plate. And you can use them in lieu of paper plates. I've seen hippies do that. So. Oh, the provenance of this is Virginia Key, so truly a native. And then we have a lovely firebush with a beautiful butterfly. This is a great plant to get started in your yard. This will have reddish flowers. The hybrids have some yellow in them. Unfortunately, most of them are hybridized. And this is a great attractor for hummingbirds, as well as most butterflies like the zebra longwing and the Julia. Go for it. It is a shrub. It'll get about 12 feet tall, but you can trim it back. You can keep it as big as you want. We have a native epiphyte. It also grows on logs. This is our Baby rubber plant is one of the common names, but most people know it as Florida pepperoni. And this is in the Piperaceae, same family as black pepper. And although this doesn't attract a ton of wildlife, except for snails, it's kind of got a unique texture to add to your yard. I think in the tropics where it also occurs, I think the fruits are eaten by bats. All our bats are insectivorous. Oh yeah, you can keep it as a houseplant. And someone very environmentally minded decided to bring a bare root specimen of this grass. And you can just stick that right in the ground when you get home tonight. That grass is an unusual grass. You find it at nurseries. It's called Paspalum monostachium. And it occurs in our marl prairies in the transverse glades. Wherever you see canals in Miami, that probably used to be a transverse glade. About this tall. It's almost like muley, but it's rhizomatous. So it'll have rhizomes that are under the ground. It will. We have a wonderful plant. This is a torchwood. And Amarys elemifera. This is a host plant for the Schaus swallowtail, an endangered butterfly that's only found in the Upper Keys and the Bahamas. And they just finished the Schaus count, I think. Friday. Mary, did they count a lot of butterflies?
We didn't get any this week, we only got 3 last week, so.
Okay. So it's still endangered then.
Yes.
I don't know if you'll get Schaus in your yard in Dade County, but you know, if everyone were to plant torchwood, you never know. It's also a host plant for the giant swallowtail. And here we have another nice shrub, small tree. This is a Florida necklace pod. This is Sophora tomentosa truncata. It's in the Fabaceae. It's a nitrogen fixer. And it'll have these beautiful yellow flowers that are tubular, which would generally suggest that they are medicinal. And this grows on the coast. Here we have a gumbo limbo with some wildflowers mixed in. You always know you're at a native plant raffle because you got more than one plant per pot. The gumbo limbo is a big tree. So you're going to want to have some space if you put this in your yard. But it's a great plant. It does attract birds. I think the fruits are eaten by migratory birds as well as white-crowned pigeons. It's in the same family as frankincense and myrrh. The sap is very sticky, and it'll have this red peeling bark on the trunk, and it's photosynthetic on the trunk. Another common name for the gumbo limbo is living exposed tree, and people would use this and just stick them in the ground as trunks, and then you'd have your fences along these trees. You could just cut off a limb and stick it in the ground and it'll grow. And the advantage of that in the tropics is it'll survive termites. Any piece of wood you stick in the tropics is gone in like 2 or 3 years because the ants and termites just destroy it. But if it's a living tree, it'll survive. We also have some of our native epiphytes. These are native bromeliads in the genus Tillandsia. And they apparently were on a gumbo limbo. So I don't know if you want to try and stick this in the ground and see if it grows. I don't advise it because it generally doesn't have a very good root system when you do that. So it may come over in a storm, but you can try it out. And this is a Tillandsia utriculata. Tillandsias are all monocarpic, which means they fruit once and then they die. And this one, when it fruits, it does die. Some of them will have pups that come at the base and it'll survive in perpetuity. But this one does not vegetatively reproduce. So there you go. Now we're coming back into some of the wildflowers. We'll do the shrub first though. We have 2 selections of privet cinna. This is a great butterfly host plant. It's a host plant for three of the sulfurs. The cloudless sulfur, the orange bark sulfur. I don't remember if it's a sleepy orange or orange dog, but one of those 2. And this is a shrub that kind of is lanky. It grows on the edges of hammocks. There's another cinna that grows in pine rockland. It's a little bit smaller, but this is the one in hammocks. Real pretty yellow flowers. Real pretty yellow flower. Oh, I wonder if I'm too far away. Real pretty yellow flowers. They're in the sisselpinoid group, which means They kind of look like orchid flowers. You know, the orchid trees, they have the same shape. So that's the privet cinna. We also have this wildflower here. This is a vining wildflower. This is climbing aster. It's a Cynthia. Now, it used to be in the genus Aster. Now they're on the genus Cynthia trichum. Just rolls off the tongue. This is Cynthia trichum curleonum. This is a gorgeous wildflower. Big inflorescences that are pink. In the winter. Plant. It probably liked its feet a little bit wet, so you might want to put it in a rain garden or near a pond or a water feature. I got 5 minutes. We have to go through the speed round. We got a lot of plants here. Your Rockland Camelina erecta. This one has blue flowers in the morning that melt off in the heat of the day. Real pretty scrambling wildflower. Grows in pine rocklands and coastal areas. We have a rabbit tobacco here, Pterocolon pycnostachium and the Asteraceae. This has small white flowers. If you want to attract a lot of rare butterflies, you need plants with small white flowers. The talas love small white flowers. A lot of the skippers, a lot of the hair streaks, they all are attracted to these little white flowered wildflowers. You can identify this because it has this webbing along the stem and the white underneath. And this, I think, is Stylosanthes hamata, or cheesy toes. I grew up, we called it pencil flower, yellow papilionoid, they're almost mustard color flowers. It's a host plant for the barred yellow butterfly, which is a little tiny yellow butterfly you see along the highway. It's ground cover. I won't be able to cover everything. There's a beautiful specimen in full bloom. This is Acalypha chimidrifolia. So it doesn't have super showy flowers, but they're here. This is in the Euphorbiaceae, which is the most toxic family in the world, although this isn't toxic. Castor beans in this family. This is a lovely little herb that grows in pine rockland. And when I say herb, you can eat it. Herbaceous just means non-woody. Okay. We have a quartet of paradise trees. This is one if you want to have some space, but it's a beautiful tree. It's aptly named. This will have fruits that'll attract ground pigeons and some other frugivorous birds. So it's a nice one for a hammock planting. We have some more pine rockland goodies. Here's similar to the climbing aster. We have this scale leaf aster, just as pretty flowers, slightly smaller. This doesn't get more than 2 or 3 feet high, whereas that climbing aster, it'll cover a wall. We have some lovely, the common name, this is Samolus ebracteatus. I think the common name is water pimpernel or one of the pimpernels, and has real pretty little white flowers. This grows on the edges of prairies and pinelands in the Everglades. We have another edge species. This, unfortunately, the blooms have fallen off. It's called pinklet, Stenandrium dulce. It's in the acanth family, same family as petunia. And it's a wonderful little wildflower for your little rockland planting. We also have another trichome or aster. This is Cynthia trichum dumosum, which has whiter flowers or more white, kind of a light pink white color. And this also grows like on the edge of moist soils, sort of like on the edge of prairie and pinelands. We have a native grass here. This is a Tripsicum floridanum, or Florida gamma grass. This is a state threatened grass. It's only found in South Florida. It's endemic to South Florida. And in Dade County, you find it in pinelands. This pot is being raffled. This is a leftover from when we had a display here. This is the last of the series, the pot series. It's your last chance to have this relic that was once owned by the Dade chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. So there you have it. Oh, are these for raffle too? Oh my God. All right, speed round. We got this pretty thing. This is a native milk pea. Butterfly enthusiasts are always asking for this thing because it hosts about 3 different butterflies, including like Durantes, sells cheaper and more. So it's a vine that's native to pinelands. We have a native edible herb. This is Physalis angulata. It's one of the ground cherries. And this will have like a little lantern, and then you pull the lantern apart, and there's a little yellow fruit. It's in the same genus as tomatillo, but the fruits are sweeter. Ooh, This is another nice one. Sometimes nurseries have them, sometimes they don't. This is West Indian cherry. It's actually a native cherry. It's not edible, but if you crush the leaves and smell it, you'll smell the cyanide, the bitter almond. This fruits in the summer. It's a nice medium-sized hammock tree. Most people don't have this in their yard. This one's weird. It's in the Caribbean, but in Florida, it's only in Dade County. It's not in the Keys or anywhere else. This is only in Dade. I know it doesn't look like much, but if you're new and you want butterflies, this is the one to get. It's Corky stem passion vine. It's a host to 3 butterflies, our state butterfly, which is zebra longwing, the Julia longwing, and the Gulf fritillary. And if you plant it, you will get them. And then we don't have time to cover everything. Skullcap, it's a state endangered wildflower that's only found in Pine Rocklands in Dade County and the Keys. And come and get some raffle tickets. All right, is this on now? Good. So tonight's program will be led by Tiffany Moore. Tiffany has a master's degree in forest resources and conservation from the University of Florida. Oh. She is the conservation and research specialist at Zoo Miami, where she conducts life history research on native butterflies and moths, as well as the endemic and endangered Miami tiger beetle and the pine rockland trapdoor spider. Zoo Miami is a special place and is part of the larger Richmond Pine Rockland Tract, the largest contiguous pine rockland tract in Miami outside of Everglades National Park. Tiffany moved to Miami in 2019, and for some reason she stayed. We are lucky to have her. Please give a warm welcome to Tiffany.
Thank you, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I didn't want to talk about butterflies, so I could be here for much longer. Get into it right away. Just kidding.
Sorry. That'll be online.
Okay. Okay. All right. Hopefully this mic is working and we can set the ambiance. All right. Anyway, so I work in a facility that is affectionately named the Butterfly Bunker. So this is a World War II era bunker, and probably most of you are from Miami. The site of the zoo was actually a Navy base during World War II, and so after the war was over and the land was decommissioned, and the zoo, the county actually bought the land, moved Crandon Park Zoo over to this current location. And because of that, we have several of these bunkers on property. This one in particular that I manage actually sits in the middle of the Pine Rocklands behind the zoo. It's really close to the fence line of Larry and Penny. I can actually see across the fence at Larry and Penny. It's also in the environmentally endangered lands section of the Pine Rockland. And so we have an agreement where I'm able to run the bunker at the zoo and also care for the plants immediately around the bunker. We've done some restoration sites to kind of implement more of the butterfly plants, so it's much easier on my workload instead of having to go out and find them. Before I was hired at the zoo, this entire area was actually being used as a storage unit for animal science department, and they kind of forgot a lot of the stuff that was in the bunker. And so I guess go back. Okay. And so a lot of the plants that were growing up around this area was actually invasive because the soil that was used to form the top of the bunker area was non-native soil, and this just makes the non-native plants really thrive there. So it is a bit of a pain to continue to manage, but we tried to scrape away all of that stuff and implement the native plants to kind of take over. And so going forward into this presentation, I'm going to open up with a controversial topic, but then it'll get better, and I promise. Okay, so in 2022, we started the Tropical Milkweed Initiative. We were starting to learn more of the research that was being published, and so we decided to clean house, and we got rid of all of our tropical milkweed on zoo grounds. It was planted in our Critter Connection area, and then because the seeds are windborne, they kind of just transferred all over the zoo. And because of that mistake, we've also pulled up tropical milkweed from our pine rockland units that's just bordering the developed part of the zoo. And so when we did that, we made a big campaign with the zoo, put it on social media as well, trying to inform a lot of people of the problems with tropical milkweed. So first, what people hear about is the OE parasite. This is a microscopic parasite. You can't see it with your naked eye. You do have to look at it under a microscope. It does cause a lot of problems, and there's a lot of published works that is online. And I will give you some other resources further into the presentation. And so first, it does break the monarch diapause. So when monarchs are coming through and they encounter tropical milkweed, that plant just existing there actually breaks them into breaks their diapause. So we typically think of monarchs coming down the East Coast and then making their way towards Mexico. But when they interact with this plant, they stop where they are and they begin to lay eggs right there. And so with that, tropical milkweed promotes the reproductive development in the migratory monarchs. So while this seems like it would be a great idea, it's actually not. And that's because they are not actually making their way towards Mexico. They're just stopping, and it's creating these resident populations of monarchs. And being in Miami, yes, we do have a resident population. I get that question a lot. So when we think of the migratory populations, we do think that monarchs are coming down the East Coast. They do come into Florida, but likely that they don't come from way up north all the way down to Miami and then go back up Florida to go to Mexico. Although I believe some of them, some monarchs have been spotted on oil rigs in the middle of the Gulf. So there are some that probably just migrate right over the water instead of following the coast. But normally we don't have migratory monarchs that come this far south. And because of the amount of milkweed that we have in South Florida, they tend to just stay. Okay, so tropical or captive reared monarch butterflies are weaker, paler, and have less elongated wings than their wild migrant counterparts. This was a study done, and it showed that they had samples from wild monarchs as well as the breeding supply that they had at the University of Georgia. And this makes sense when you're thinking about all of the monarchs that are flying over towards their migration spots or their overwintering spots. We don't want them to miss out on some of these key traits that they would acquire naturally in the wild. And so we're kind of doing them a disservice by captive rearing them. Do healthy monarchs migrate farther? The short answer is yes. So when they have the right amount of milkweed, native milkweeds, and they don't have all of the other problems like OE or the paleness of their color, or if they're weaker, they are not making it to their overwintering locations. And that also promotes that they kind of just stay where they are and they become residents rather than actually going into their overwintering spots. Tropical milkweed can lower the OE replication within infected monarchs due to high levels of cardinaloid toxins. Again, it sounds like it would be a good thing, but what this actually shows is that monarchs are surviving longer with an OE parasite load. So that means that they are transferring the OE parasites to more plants, and they're creating a much more of a bigger issue instead of just unfortunately dying off as the weaker ones or the diseased ones. Normally, the healthier monarchs are the ones that are going to actually make it to the overwintering sites. There are some overwintering sites in Southern California as well as Mexico. And so they're just not going to make it there when they have bigger problems like this. So these are two different maps. The one on the left is a map that came from data collected at the University of Georgia. All of these spots here are where samples were taken from of monarchs. So the University of Georgia gave away monarch testing kits, and so they were able to test individual monarchs, send that sample kit over to the university, and they counted how many OE spores were in that individual sample. So where you see the darker points on the map is where the heavier loads of OE comes from. If you overlay that with a map from iNaturalist and where tropical milkweed exists, they match. So I just like to show that this is where tropical milkweed occurs, and heavy OE parasites also occur because of that same pattern. And I do want to make a note that the sample points from the university are all based on volunteer sample kits. So needless to say, where there is no point, that doesn't mean that there are no OE or no monarchs. That just means that there were limited amount of samples, and that's just how the data was collected. So as a zoo and an AZA institution, we participate in safe programs for various species, monarch being one of them. And so with that, we have a management plan, and we have a list of things that we have to abide by in order to be part of that safe program. So things like planting native plants, doing restoration, doing educational webinars such as this one, or even giving away seeds, seed collecting, growing more plants, things like that all count in part of the management program. It's not only about monarchs, although monarch is our big species, but butterfly guarding is also within the same management. And so the two other resources that I mentioned earlier is there's Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation and the Monarch Joint Venture. Both of these are great organizations that on their website, they show different publications and more information than I could give tonight. So if you're interested in more about monarchs and tropical milkweed or native milkweeds, I would visit those sites. On our management plan from the AZA plan, this is a chart that was produced by the Xerces Society. And so on the left-hand side, that is the tropical or the monarchs reported, and then on the right side are the number of sites monitored. So over time, you can see that there are many more sites that we have been monitoring in the western side. And then the bars are the amount of monarchs actually counted. So in the last part of this graph here, 2023, and I drew the line over, I just want you to remember this number. It's just over 200,000 monarchs that were counted on the western side. So this doesn't even count any of the eastern side monarchs. And so the good news is that Miami-Dade County has a bunch of milkweeds. The bad news is you can't find them in nurseries. So it's really hard to find these milkweeds. They are kind of rare in the pine rockland at least. And so when we do find them, we try to map them out. If they have seeds, we're able to collect those seeds because we have a partnership with Fairchild. And so they're able to reproduce those seeds. And some of those seeds could be given away to their members and so forth. But I know that it may not come from Florida stock necessarily, but if you try searching the scientific name of some of these milkweeds, you can find them elsewhere online. I want to preface all of the monarch talk to talk more about the imperiled butterflies. So we have a lot of butterflies in South Florida, and a lot of these need help more than monarchs do. So I like to do the doom and gloom first, but I also like to show that there's a lot more butterfly species that we could be helping rather than the monarch because of all the controversial topics that I've just mentioned. And so one of these, as an example, is the Atala. It had an up and down population status for decades. And then in the 60s, it was thought to have actually gone extinct. So then the plant, the Coontie plant, was protected. So you couldn't dig it up from any natural area anymore. And then it was also being implemented into landscaping. You can find it at Dolphin Mall. You can find it downtown Miami. You can find it in front of the Hickman building, which is where the Parks Department has all of our department things. You can find it along the highways. And so because of that, it created these stepping stones for the butterfly to branch back out into their population. And it's still considered an imperiled butterfly species, but it's not listed as endangered. Okay, so for the next 2 slides, I'm talking about some of the research that I've done in the lab. The first one is the faithful beauty moth. This is a diurnal moth species, so it flies during the day. With my study, we documented 4 new host plants, so the blodgett swallowwort, pilot alamanda, the tuberosa milkweed, and the white twine vine. None of these plants were listed in previous literature for a host plant, but we have found the caterpillars in the pine rockland consuming all of those plants. I confirmed a variance in the number of larval instars. So when they go through their molting stages, as they grow up and get bigger in caterpillar stages, they exhibited either 5 or 6 instar levels. And so what that could mean is that they don't want to come out as an adult all at the same time. If we did that, then the predators could attack us all. And so they might do this as that type of variance, but that's my theory. They all had the same conditions in the lab. They all had the same amount of food, the same temperature, the same humidity. So I couldn't rule out any other variants as to why that would occur. And then I documented that the entire life cycle for this species is 41 days. So we could have several generations of this species in a single year. The second species that I worked with is the lesser wasp moth. It's also a diurnal moth species. It's one of my favorites. It acts just like a wasp, so people tend to think that it's bad, but it's really sweet. And so I had the first observation of a new host plant. So in the former literature, it was listed as quailberry as a crossopetalum species, and I had documented that it used maidenberry as well. And during this study, I actually went back to one of our restoration sites at the zoo, and I followed a female all around the restoration site, and I watched her lay eggs on both crossopetalum species. So I could confirm that they do use it, and it doesn't seem that they have a preference for either or. This species also has a variance in the number of larval instars. So this was 6, 7, or 8 instar levels. And while there were 3 individuals that had 8 instars, but that's a low number. The average was with 7 instar levels. And again, it could be the same thing, that they want to have a variance and when they reach adulthood so that they're not all getting attacked by possible predators. It could also be that they're mating with different generations throughout the year as well, so that they're not pairing up from the same cohort. And this species was listed as imperiled by the Florida Natural Areas Inventory. And because of that, I strived really hard to try and release more adults than I had taken in the wild. And so while it was, I believe it was like under 50 individuals that I had collected from the wild, and then I released 136 back. So now when I see them in the pine rockland around the zoo, I think of them as my kids. So the Florida dusky wing is also an imperiled butterfly species. It's a candidate listing for federal endangered status. Its host plant is locustberry or sometimes Barbados cherry. I've seen them naturally on Barbados cherry, but more so their preferred host plant is locustberry. There was a study done out of UF with Dr. Jarrett Daniels, and they did some genetics on the Florida dusky wing. They took samples from various areas in South Florida, and the result from that study basically showed that the genetics are essentially the same within their range, which is a good thing, because if they are on the decline, that means that we can raise this butterfly species, say in my lab, or at UF, and then we're able to translocate this species to various areas to help out their population status. If they were different in genetics, that would mean that we would have to specifically rear that location of genetics into that pocket. And so with that, it was also doing biological surveys for this butterfly, and they also found that it was being misidentified with the horse's dusky wing. They look nearly identical, except that the Florida dusky wing has 3 small white dots near the top vein, and the horse's dusky wing has 4. So you do have to use close focus binoculars and hope that they land on something to get a good enough an eye for it. And then if you want to have this butterfly in your yard, you do have to have a couple of locust berries, because males are territorial. They want to protect their area, and they want to, chase the females as they fly by you. So keep that in mind too, if it's something that you're going to try to garden for. Bartram scrub hairstreak is a federally endangered butterfly that I continue to work with. Last summer, I had a research experience for undergraduate students, an REU student, under my monitoring, and she did this entire project all summer from May to August, and we looked at only the units of the pine rockland at the zoo, and we did a 50-meter grid. So we displayed points on a map in all of the pine rockland units, and we selected 6 particular units that had a variance in management style. So we had a unit that had just burned. We had a unit that had not been burned in more than 12 years. We had units that were heavily dense and so forth. And so we wanted to characterize what the habitat would look like, how many butterflies, caterpillars, or eggs, how many croton plants did we find. And so we documented all of that, and this is what we found. And so all of the points on the map is where the croton conjugation is. You can see up towards the eastern edge there, that's primarily where we have found the Bartrams. In my opinion, it's the best habitat for them at the zoo. It's way more open. It has less palm coverage, has less pine canopy coverage. And so this is primarily where we see them. This is not the only place where I have seen them in the past before this study as well. So I do want to mention that we looked at 231 plants all over the zoo, and we only found 14 eggs and 2 larvae. So if you remember back to what I said about the Western monarchs, they found over 200,000 monarchs on the Western side in 2023. So if you compare that with something that's endangered here, we only found this little amount. So I wanted to make that stark difference here, because everyone tends to garden for the monarchs thinking that they are endangered, but we actually have way more endangered butterflies in South Florida, probably than anywhere else in the US, because of our subtropical area. In addition to the research that I do at my lab at the zoo, I also partner with the Florida Museum and UF. And so I do the shelf surveys, not currently in the past year or so because I have had other projects with Bartram's, but I have gone out and looked for shells as well. And then we had a program with the Miami Blue Butterfly. So we partnered with Fairchild as well, and they were able to go out to various locations of where Miami Blue habitat occurred in the past. And we analyzed what plant characteristics were in those particular parts. And we looked at how many nectar plants are around the immediate areas of their host plants. And we categorized that by a priority list. And so we made a priority list for another site that's at Hobe Sound National Park and National Refuge. And so we were continuing to do surveys for Miami Blue butterflies. And so we developed this, am I out? It could be batteries. So at the zoo, we developed a butterfly garden guide here. This is only for Miami-Dade County, and we had a lot of different plants listed here. This is both nectar and host plant availability. And then this is the QR code if you want to scan that. And the second garden guide that we made for the Florida bonneted bat. So for a lot of people wondering what they can do for the Florida bonneted bat, we don't want people to put up a bat box in their yard because it is a federally listed bat. And if you sell the house, maybe your next homeowner won't want that bat box there. So we developed a plant guide that could help the bats. So if you plant these types of plants, it makes the insects come into your yard, they eat those types of plants, and then as they're flying at night, that's what the bats are using to find food. So if you want this garden guide, this is the QR code. No? Okay, if you, let me see. My email is here. So if you want to take a photo of that, if you're interested, I can email it to you. So with that, I can answer any questions if you all have questions. Sorry, say that again. Like mammals that have a blood supply. And fun fact, only female mosquitoes will bite.
What is the situation with giant milkweed?
So giant milkweed has not been tested as much as tropical milkweed has, but because it's also non-native, it probably has the same tendency. it doesn't get cut back as often either as our native milkweeds would. And so you might still have the same OE issues. There was a study that actually showed clean butterflies can. Yeah, they utilize the same milkweed plants as well. And so there hasn't been as many studies with other butterflies like queens, viceroy, or soldiers, but it's possible that those ones can receive it too.
What's the origin of the OE?
So actually OE is a native microscopic parasite. It was supposed to coexist with monarchs. The problem that we're having more so now is that it's just too much. So if the load of OE was really low, then the butterfly could persist without any issues, except we created a situation where we're planting tropical milkweed and it's making the OE thrive more.
Someone on the YouTube chat is asking if you could repeat the questions.
repeat the
so we
Oh,
can
repeat
have
the question.
context.
Oh,
Someone-
sorry, yes.
Someone's asking if there's similar guides for Highlands County. Because these are just for Miami-Dade, right?
Yeah, these, so the question is, are these guides only for Miami-Dade or if there's anything else for other counties? The guides that I presented on only come from Miami-Dade County because I did some cross-referencing with our native plants here. But there might be other resources online that shows a butterfly guide for that specific county. Sure. So I call it still in the beta phase. They're asking about the Atala program at the zoo. And so we partnered with Fairchild Tropical Botanical Garden and the members of Native Plant Network. It's taken me a minute to remember their new name. But Native Plant Network members can, if they meet the criteria, they can receive Atalas from me. And so part of that criteria is having 8 large kuntis, and I think it was about 4 or 5 nectar plants that bloom all year long, as well as having other nectar plants that bloom various throughout the year. If you have all of that and you're ready for Atalas, and when I have a supply of Atalas, I reach out to people and then they can come to the zoo and pick up Atalas from me. So when I give them out, it's in the pupa phase. I use a non-toxic Elmer's glue. I glue them to popsicle sticks so it's easier for transport. They're not agitated by the vibrations of a car. In caterpillars, they tend to get kind of irritated by that. But you can put them into your pop-up cage at home. And then whenever they eclose out, you get to see that eclosure and then you get to release it in your own yard. I don't have issues sourcing them because they're everywhere at the zoo. But I do a lot of butterfly releases at the zoo as well. And so I may not have Atalas all the time to give away. We do get some of our supply from Montgomery Botanical Garden. They're a botanical garden. They have a lot of cycad plants. And so they consider the Atala as a pest, but I consider it as an advantage because they just collect them for me. They give them to me. And then I have a few rows of kunti planted at the zoo. I directly put the caterpillars on it so they're hungry right away. And then once they turn into pupa, I'm able to basically harvest them. And then I can set them up to do a butterfly release at the zoo, which is what most of the time I do. Or if I have enough, then I just do the giveaway.
So with the issues with the non-native milkweed, someone from YouTube is asking, is the choice of between planting non-native milkweed and not having monarchs in the county at all? Or because native milkweeds are so hard to source and grow in the industry.
Yeah, so it's a difficult decision, and I completely understand if people want to continue seeing monarchs in the yard. I love that butterfly too. I think that I would promote other butterfly species just because they need more help than monarchs do. But if you don't want to get rid of your tropical milkweed, you don't have to just yet. You could wait until you find a source where you can get native milkweeds and just phase them out as you can. So if you don't want to just rip them out right away, or if you do have caterpillars on your plants, I wouldn't get rid of them just yet. Sure. So the question is whether or not cutting tropical milkweed is effective for the OE. The short answer is that cutting it down periodically or just once a year is not very effective. So say if you cut your milkweed down, but your neighbor doesn't, and those butterflies are going to be transferring over from yard to yard because they're just going to go where the flowers are. And so if everybody's on board, then you might make a dent. But with that being said, there's much more larger supplies of tropical milkweed, especially in like landscaping areas as well. And so the native milkweeds are probably better for that aspect. So that's my suggestion.
Is there any research on fungicides or insecticides that might kill this parasite?
I don't think so because it lives on the butterfly. And so it's on the abdomen of the butterfly. So you wouldn't be able to put anything there to get rid of the parasite itself. As the butterfly is flying from flower to flower, it's dropping those OE spores directly onto the plant. They don't even have to touch the plant to drop the spores. They can just hover over it. And as they're moving their wings, they could be dropping those spores. And so you can't wash your tropical milkweed either because it doesn't really get rid of the problem because it's also on the butterfly.
What about the big box stores? Somebody's buying a big tropical plant.
Yeah, so large box stores do continue to sell the tropical milkweed. There is a colleague of mine at Fairchild who is working with me to pursue some restrictions, I think, within the county. He's pursuing to try and get a tropical milkweed listed as a noxious weed. That's not to say that you have to pull it out of your yard or that it's going to be banned indefinitely, but it probably, if it goes through, I'm not sure what the policies are, but it could mean that those big box stores would not be able to sell them anymore. But that is probably a future question. So the question is, will mosquito spraying affect atollas or other butterflies? It will. That's the short answer. I know that in the Keys, when they do spraying for mosquitoes, the district down there is very good at communicating with Fish and Wildlife Service as well as park rangers in the Everglades because of the shell swallowtail and other butterflies. I'm not sure if that's the same type of communication that we are receiving up in Miami-Dade County. If it's like a third-party company and they're just coming through the neighborhood, it probably does have an effect on your yard as well. It's across a pedalum rye. Racoma. Yeah.
Okay,
I'm not so great with the scientific names.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Gardening helps get alternatives that have done well down here as far as the native milk.
had very limited success with like swamp milkweed, and since it died back relatively quickly, and I planted like 6 or 8 of them, and it's water feeding, irrigation water on a regular basis. Is there any others that you also might recommend?
Yeah, so tuberosa, I have seen monarchs on. I've gone to survey at Nixon Smiley Preserve, which is another county park. I've seen monarch caterpillars on the tuberosa. That is a plant that dies back too. I know that it's hard to find in local nurseries. I know that some people have told me that they found it online. I work for Miami-Dade County, so I cannot give you any specific locations to where.
It's complicated because tuberosa has a broad range. And the ones down here are these spindly little plants called subspecies Wolfsii. So if you go to Kansas and you see tuberosa, it's this giant, gorgeous thing. And most of our milkweeds here have like 1 or 2 stems. The exception is viridis, which is a very limited range. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say if you are looking for tuberosa or any other native milkweed, try to find a stock that's from Florida.
Problems with nursery business is that they get a lot of things called fruit winners, and fruit winners are not always so genetically accurate to the area that they grow them at, and they grow in some giant facility that and ship around the United States and claim to have the best. So I know it's hard to find these things because it's pride. But then you pick sources, and if the human nursery sometimes sells stuff, but other than that, it's tough.
It'll be a miracle if they're ever able to make milkweeds work. I know Raul's trying. So you're gonna have Asclepius, tuberosa. I know you sell incarnata.
Yeah. I will say that the viridis milkweed as well as the tuberosa milkweed at the zoo, we do have them. They're on opposite sides of the zoo. So in order for that particular plant to be pollinated, you have to have the same individual go from this one to that one. And so years ago, Brian from Fairchild tried to hand pollinate our viridis and it was not successful. I tried this year, it was not successful. I even tried to use a monarch inside of a butterfly pop-up cage and force it to nectar from this viridis, and then I moved it to another viridis, and that didn't work either.
It's set fruit in my yard. I have one in a pot.
Yeah. They are out there. Is for at least the ones at the zoo, they're just not conjugated together. Yeah. Any last questions?
All right, one more.
So the University of Florida, Dr. Jarrett Daniels' lab has been working on that. And so he has a PhD student, or I think she's a PhD candidate now. She's been working with the Miami Blue. Her name is Sarah Cabrera Steele, and she's been doing a lot of surveying for her PhD. We also have a UF technician that's stationed in the Keys, and so he's going out to the smaller keys, Marquesas Key, and surveying over there. I think that the difficulty in surveying for them is that it's a very small butterfly and they could kind of live under the radar of surveys. So they're very small caterpillars, very small eggs. So it's really hard to detect when you have a lot of plant material to go through. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. All right, so you can buy raffle tickets from people in the back, and thank you for coming. Usually turn it off for the raffle.